Hi there, my name is Vadim Chalikov. I'm the winemaker of Kacaba Vineyards and Winery. We are a small boutique craft winery located on the Niagara Escarpment in 20 Mile Bench here in Vineland. Today, I would love to introduce you to two of our award-winning wines from the portfolio, the 2020 Unoaked Chardonnay and the 2020 Cabernet. The Chardonnay is made from the select local grapes, vinified without the use of oak in stainless steel tanks. This wine is going to be driven by the light fruit with peachy and tropical aromas and long lingering finish. The Cabernet is composed of 70% Cabernet Franc grapes and 30% Cabernet Sauvignon. This is a rich, full-bodied red wine with flavors of raspberry, chocolate, and cassis with a slightly spicy finish. Both of these wines are available at your local LCBO stores or LCBO.com, as well as some select grocery stores. They are beautifully priced at $15.95 a bottle, and we are pleased to announce that they both have successfully competed at scoring double gold medal recognition at the All-Canadian National Championships this year. I hope you enjoy them and have a fantastic day. And now I would like to introduce you to Chef Steve from Zooma Caters, who is going to cook for you two delicious dishes to go along with these two wines.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. You've heard Vadim tell you about these two wines that are available at the LCBO, and now what I'm going to do is share a couple of recipes. Classic recipes that we are going to simplify to make them easier to make at home. So the first one we're going to make is a butternut squash risotto. So there you go, butternut squash, just so you see the right squash to buy. Others will do, but this one has a nice sweet flavor to it. And we're going to make the risotto. Instead of using rice, which is the classic way to do it, we're going to use orzo pasta. So what that does is it cuts down the cooking time from 45 minutes to 8 to 10 minutes, which I think makes this just a much more friendly recipe to tackle. So very similar in the way we would do a rice-style risotto, we're going to sweat some onions and garlic. So I've got a little bit of olive oil that I'll put in my pan, and a splash of this wonderful chard. This really is a great chard for the price point. I think it's got a great balance. I think Ontario is making some of the best Chardonnay in the world right now. That's my personal opinion. So we're going to put a splash of the Chardonnay into the pan as well. And we're going to add some sweet onions, as well as a little bit of garlic. A kitchen trick that I wanted to share with you is that if you're doing garlic, instead of cutting it with a knife, use a microplane. It's nice and easy. You can work really quickly with it, and your garlic is nice and fine and chopped. So we've added garlic and onions to our pan with a little bit of olive oil and white wine. We're going to let that sweat with a lid on for about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, we've sweated off the garlic and the onions, and we're ready to go to the next step. So I'm going to add a little more olive oil to my pan, and I've got about a cup of orzo risotto here. So the orzo pasta is basically small almond shape. You see it a lot in soups, but it's great for doing this as well. So we're going to add that cup of the orzo into our pan. And there's a good amount of olive oil in here already, but we just want to take our orzo, stir it around a little bit, and just get it nice and coated, and just let it sit in a hot pan for a few minutes, just to let it heat up and toughen the outside surface a little bit. So we're just going to let that sit for a couple of minutes, and then we'll deglaze with a little bit of white wine. So as we are letting that orzo warm up a little bit, it'll start to stick a little bit to the bottom of the pan as it absorbs the oil. And it's gotten a little darker in color now as well. So we're pretty much at that point where we can add a little bit of white wine and deglaze. So I'll throw a splash in. That wine will absorb into the grains of orzo and imbue that beautiful Chardonnay, the fruitiness, the pear and the apple into the orzo. Most of that alcohol is going to burn off now. So now we're ready to go. So I've got about 1 liter of chicken stock here, which I will start to add a little bit at a time. So the orzo, like a typical pasta, is going to take about 8 to 10 minutes to cook. So we can, if you want, you can set a timer for that, but I'm going to add some stock to the pan. For the first part, I'll add a reasonable amount of stock and allow the orzo to just sit in a nice puddle of broth. You can leave the lid off, but you can also add your lid back on and it'll just speed up your cooking process a bit, because as that pasta cooks, it's going to absorb that chicken stock, and in about 8 to 10 minutes, when it's fully cooked and engorged, it'll be ready to go. And just before it's finished, we'll add the butternut squash that I've already pre-cooked. So I've got a bowl of butternut squash that I cubed and cooked. We'll add that in as well and integrate it into our orzo, and we'll have a beautiful meal. Okay, so we've been cooking our risotto for about 5 minutes or so, and you can see in the pan the orzo is absorbing all that chicken stock. It's not quite cooked, but you can see how it's starting to dry up and get a little thicker. So this is where you want to be careful and just add stock in little amounts so that you don't end up with a result that's too watery. So we're just going to incorporate the stock a little bit at a time as we continue to cook. And always keep a couple of spoons nearby. You can dip in and test the cooked level of your orzo. You're looking for something that's, as they always say, al dente, but you know, take it in your mouth, and if it feels right, then you know it's cooked. So we're gonna let that cook again, and we're gonna adjust as we get close to our final cooking time. We're gonna give it a couple of minutes, and then we'll add the squash in as well. Okay, so orzo is almost completely cooked, so now we're going to add the butternut squash. So what I did with the squash was I cut it in half and cut the skin off, cubed it, and then basically just cooked it in a covered pan with a little bit of water, salt and pepper for about an hour, hour and 15 minutes till it was nice and tender. So I'm just going to add the squash in. So we add the squash in. As it heats up and continues to cook along with the orzo, it will break down and kind of create a nice homogeneous look to it. So we're going to let that cook for a couple more minutes. A little more stock, and I think this will be the final push to get this done. What I'll do is when it's almost completely cooked, I'll taste it again. I'll adjust the salt and pepper, and just before we plate, just so that we don't get too much flavor, because I always like to know how my stock is tasting in there and how it's reducing down. So I'll adjust salt and pepper right at the very end. And just before we plate, we'll add a little bit of butter in just to finish off the risotto. And then we're onto a plate and we're eating. So this is a meal that you can, if you make your squash ahead of time, you can cook this meal in 15 minutes. So big thing when I cook, I taste all the time. Salt, pepper, spice. I like to know where everything's going along the way. So I'm just adjusting right now for salt. But I really encourage you to keep trying and progressively build up your flavor till it works for you. So add a bit of salt. Taste it. Does it need a bit more salt? Add a bit more, but don't over salt to the point where because you can't remove it. So do it in stages, try your food. Salt's perfect right now. I'm gonna add a little bit of cracked pepper. And as you can see, we've got a beautiful creamy consistency, and you can really smell that fresh ground pepper now. We're going to add a little bit of butter to finish, so just a couple of pads of butter, which will just enhance that creaminess. And I won't add more salt to this because I know I'm going to finish with a little bit of Parmesan. So let's plate this beautiful orzo, butternut squash orzo risotto. I've got a little bit of grated parm that will just finish on top. If you've got some fresh herbs lying around the house, a garnish, you can use sage, basil, thyme. And there we go. So let's look at our next recipe, the Cabernet-Braised Short Ribs. So in this recipe, the wine plays a more central role in the ingredient list. And what I've tried to do again is take a classic recipe, simplify it so that you're gonna have more courage to try it at home. So what we're gonna do today, there are bone-in short ribs and there are also boneless short ribs. So we're gonna use boneless short ribs. I've got a pan full of them right here, as you can see. So I've laid them out in the pan and we're gonna get ready to braise them. So what's braising? Braising is a long, slow cook at a relatively low temperature with, in this case, meat covered with liquid, braising liquid. So cooking temperature is 275 degrees Fahrenheit, time 4 to 4.5 hours. So what we've got here, I've pre-done the braising liquid. The recipe will be up on the website if you're interested. I would say about 50% of that liquid is the Kacaba Cabernet, but we've also done something that's a little bit of a fusion type flavor style. We've paired it with some Asian elements. So also in this liquid, we have soy sauce, a little splash of fish sauce. If you don't have fish sauce, it's not a big deal. There is brown sugar. For heat, we use gochujang, which is fermented pepper paste. You can use any kind of hot sauce. I particularly like that one because there's an intensity, but also almost a sweetness to it. There is also a little bit of sesame oil and beef stock. Fine, if you've got chicken stock, that works well also. We pull that recipe together, add water to it to thin it down a little bit for the braising. So once this braising liquid is ready to go, we've got our ribs in the pan, and I'm going to add the braising liquid and completely cover the meat. So just enough liquid so that the meat is completely submersed. And then, and maybe I should back up a step here. In a lot of braised short rib recipes, you'll see instructions to take that meat and sear it off first in a frying pan. I find that there's enough flavor here with the braising liquid that I can skip that step and just go right to braising the meat. So we've got it covered with liquid, lid on, and into the oven. So 4.5 hours. So the great thing about this is a recipe you can do a day ahead. So if you're entertaining, you can have this all done and enjoy your guests. So we'll pop it into the oven. So that's a 4.5 hour cook. And when that's done, we're gonna pull those out and show you what the next steps are. Okay, our ribs have been in the oven at 275 for 4.5 hours. I'm gonna take them out right now. So everything is beautifully cooked and the meat will be tender. And here's a big reason why I like to do this a day ahead of serving. Because what I'll do now is I will take all the meat out of this pan and set it aside. And then I'm gonna take all this liquid and put it into a pot, and I'm gonna let it cool down, and I'm actually going to put it in the fridge overnight and let it completely chill. The reason I'm gonna do that is that we're gonna take that braising liquid and reduce it down. You can do it the day of, but I find it a little more challenging because there is a relatively large amount of fat because this is a slightly fattier cut. So you're actually going to get a bit of hot fat in your braising liquid, so that if you chill it overnight, that will completely chill down, create a fat cap, and you can just go in there with a spatula, remove it in the morning, so that all you've got left is braising liquid and no residual fat left behind. And that's going to give you a much nicer finish on your liquid that you'll reincorporate back into the ribs. So what we're going to do is we'll take that braising liquid and reduce it by at least half. So basically just put your pot on the stove, get it up to a boil, take the lid off, know the rough depth, so use a knife or a spoon to know how deep your liquid is at the start. Let it reduce by about half, and that's going to intensify the flavor of that liquid. And when that's finished reducing, because we don't have, if we're using boneless short ribs, we don't have the gelatin coming out of the bones going into our braising liquid. So the liquid is a little bit thinner, so you can treat it the same way you would treat a gravy if you're making a roast beef and making a pan gravy. You can add a thickener, so you can you can stir in a little bit of flour as a roux, or you can use some cornstarch just to thicken that a little bit, so that when you add it back into your braised short ribs, it'll just have a little bit more weight behind it. So we're going to do that. It's going to take about 45 minutes to reduce this by about half. But once we're done, we're going to have the finished gravy, and we'll show you how we incorporate it back into the meat. Okay, quick word about the wine, the Kacaba Cabernet. It's got a beautiful, smooth, velvety texture to it. It's not too tannic, which I think makes a great cooking wine. And considering about half of my braising liquid is wine, I didn't want something that was going to overpower or even give you sort of a bit of a dry mouth feel. So I think this is absolutely fabulous for that. It's a great sipping wine as well. So if you are going to use this in putting together the short ribs, you're going to need a couple of bottles, because half of it will already be gone in your braising liquid, and you'll want a little bit more to serve with your family or friends. All right, so our braising liquid has reduced by at least half. We thickened it this time with a little bit of cornstarch, and for the magic of television and media, we already have some reduced braising liquid ready to go. So we have spooned that over the cooked short ribs. So what we've done now is that this is ready to go. So this has all been done a day ahead. You can leave that in the fridge, and a braised meat reheats beautifully, so you can throw that back in the oven at 225, 250 and reheat that for about an hour, and you're going to be ready to go. Okay, so our braising liquid has now reduced by at least half. We've thickened it a little bit, and it's all ready to be reincorporated into the meat. So for purposes of the video and time, we've already got some ready, and we've spooned it over the cooked short ribs. So we've added the gravy back in. So as I said, this is a thing that's great to do the day before. And basically you can leave that in the fridge, take it out, you can reheat it at 250 degrees for about an hour, and it's perfectly ready to serve. You can accompany that with a lot of times you'll see it on a bed of mashed potatoes. We're going to plate this up the way we've been serving it on the patio here at Kacaba, and we're going to do it on a little layer of navy bean hummus, and we've sort of maintained that Asian influence, and we've created a little very quick zucchini kimchi that we make sort of in an overnight style, and we're going to use that as a little topper just to add a little more heat and crunch, as well as some acidity, which will help balance off the richness of the meat. So we'll put that together and show you what the final plate looks like. Okay, so here's our final plating with the Cabernet-Braised Short Ribs. We've done it on a bed of navy bean hummus, topped with some quick zucchini kimchi. What's great about this meal is that you can do a large portion for a multi-course meal, or you can also make small plates if you're doing more of an appetizer style cocktail party. So great for the holidays in both ways. So thanks very much for watching. Definitely look for Kacaba wines at the LCBO, LCBO.com supermarkets. And of course, come to Kacaba in Vineland. It's a great outing. So thanks again, and happy holidays.
Cheers.